Alright, it's story time. So, way back in 2015, I was going through a particularly rough time in my life where I was trying to get my shit together and feel like a functioning human being again after a series of mental health related issues. I had a couple months off from school before I would go back and finish up my degree, and I felt like my mind wasn't quite right yet. I decided that a good way to reacclimate myself to the rigors of study and critical thinking would be to start up a reading habit again. I was no stranger to reading for fun, and there were a number of books that I look back on fondly from my adolescence. But over the years, the habit had gotten lost in the shuffle of working for a living and trying to make my way through school at the same time. I had expressed my desire to dive into some literature to a friend of mine at the time, and the next time we hung out, he came to me with a book in his hand that would, unbeknownst to me, change my life forever. That book, as you might have been able to tell from the title of the video, was The Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. I wasn't working very much at the time, and I had a lot of time to kill, so I dove into the book straight away, and after a few days of reading it in small chunks, I was hooked. The reason I say that the book changed my life is that it provided a spark in me for the love of reading, and since reading that book, I've gone on to read dozens and dozens of other books that have brought so much joy to my life. I've read through all of Murakami's English catalog and have delved into books by other prominent Asian authors like Banana Yoshimoto and Hong Kong, which I probably wouldn't have been exposed to had I not developed such a love for Murakami's writing. Recommending Haruki Murakami to someone is somewhat of a tricky business. His books all sort of occupy this space in between reality and some other stranger dimension that's hard to describe. They also tend to lack as strict of a plot as you might expect from other contemporary fiction writers. Some examples of plots from his books include an old man who talks to cats and a teenage boy who may have killed his father go on separate journeys that intertwine in profound and mystical ways. An advertising executive goes on a quest to discover the whereabouts of a mysterious sheep that may be running the world. A young woman whose sister is in a state of metaphysical permasleep wanders around Tokyo one night, becoming entwined in a debacle involving a hotel manager, a prostitute, and the Chinese mafia. Murakami has a small handful of books that don't delve too deep into the surreal, but for the most part, his stories all have this sort of melancholy, dreamlike quality about them. Reading his stories almost puts me into a state of meditation, where upon putting the book down, I re-enter reality from a long slumber full of fever dreams and visions of a world not unlike our own, and yet just out of reach. I had considered doing a video about the work of Haruki Murakami as a whole, but I like each of his novels so strongly and for completely different reasons that I think they all deserve their own dedicated time and space. The Wind Up Bird Chronicle seemed like as good of a place as any to start with, both because it was the first one I read and because the book is often considered his magnum opus of sorts. With each successive release of his, reviewers seem to compare his newest work with Wind Up Bird, using it as a sort of pillar of excellence with which to measure the merits of what's in front of them. Now that we have a little background information on my experience and the work of the man himself, let's get into what this book is and why I love it so much. The Wind Up Bird Chronicle, published as 3 books in Japan throughout 1994 and 1995, and as a single book in the United States in 1997, begins with our narrator, Toru Okada, searching for his missing cat at the request of his wife Kumiko in the alleyways behind their home. During his search, he meets Mei Kasahara, a curious teenage girl who has been watching him from her backyard as he looks for his cat. Mei and Toru strike up a conversation that sparks a friendship that develops as the story continues. Their conversation takes a turn towards an abandoned house where the stray cats in the neighborhood sometimes hang out, and where Toru's cat might be found. The house is said to have a bad omen, and contains an empty well in the backyard which becomes important to Toru later in the book. Upon returning home without the cat, Kumiko requests that Toru meet up with a clairvoyant named Malta Kano to seek help with finding the missing cat, suggested to Kumiko by her brother Noboru Wataya, an academic and later a political figure, beloved by the public and despised by Toru. Noboru Wataya serves as the main antagonist of the book. Later in the story, when Kumiko goes missing, Noboru Wataya informs Toru that Kumiko has been seeing another man and wants to end her relationship with Toru. Through Toru's interactions with the clairvoyant Malta Kano, as well as her sister, Kreta Kano, he starts to unravel Noboru's nefarious past and the mysterious circumstances under which his wife has disappeared. These plot points lay down the basic groundwork for the book, but there is so much more in this book that exists outside of the scope of a traditional narrative. For large stretches of the book, we follow Toru as he sits at the bottom of the aforementioned well, reminiscing about the past he's shared with Kamiko, and experiencing dreamlike sequences where he is transported through the membrane separating his reality from another, uncovering secrets that may connect his dreams with reality. Other events that we see Toru involved in include Toru wandering around the city people-watching, tallying up the number of balding men at the subway station for a wig company with Mei Kasahara, and becoming employed by a woman named Nutmeg, who tasks him with relieving middle-aged women of a specific kind of inner turmoil that has developed inside of them. After hearing all of that, is it starting to make sense why recommending Murakami is kind of a tricky deal? It's a lot to process, and it's hard to imagine how all these things come together into a cohesive, digestible story. But I promise you, it does. With Murakami, you might have to check some of your preconceived notions about narrative at the door, so that you can settle into the story and start to enjoy the world that you're entering. What's beautiful about Murakami is the way that he writes and the atmosphere that he creates. Murakami books are easy to read. There's not a ton of highfalutin or complicated language going on. There are lots of observations about everyday things and activities that bring out the beauty in the mundane. What starts out as a guy looking for his cat turns into this surreal odyssey full of interesting characters and mysteries that sometimes remain unsolved. Murakami poses a lot of questions, and he doesn't always give you answers. I often find myself finished with one of his books, still wondering about what I just read and what it all means. There are portions of the Wind Up Bird Chronicle that seem almost entirely unrelated to the main story. Side quests laid out by supporting characters that toss you into a different narrative for a chapter or two. Maybe that's frustrating for some, but those sections of the book are some of my favorite passages in the whole story. In particular, there are some sections of the book where Toru is listening to, and then later reading, a story that a man who is carrying out the wishes of another character's will is telling him, involving his time in the Kwangtung army during the Japanese occupation of Manchukuo. The story involves the man's experience as a soldier in Manchukuo, being held hostage by a crazed superior officer, witnessing a man being skinned alive, and eventually being tossed into the bottom of a well to die before being rescued by the man whose will he is carrying out in present day. The descriptions in this detour are so harrowing and intense and uniquely mystical that I was completely entranced, and almost surprised when that part of the story ended and I was thrust back into Toru's journey. I love the Wind Up Bird Chronicle because it's surreal and unpredictable and really unlike anything else I've ever read. Up until I had read this book, I had never been so thoroughly engaged while at the same time being so confounded by what I was reading. The minute it was done, I went out and got another Murakami book so I could keep on chasing that feeling that the Wind Up Bird Chronicle had given me. While I may have a passion for the Wind Up Bird Chronicle and the rest of Haruki Murakami's work, I do recognize that it's probably not for everyone. I've had middling success when recommending his work to my friends, and I wouldn't even be surprised if you picked it up and didn't latch onto it immediately. With that said, I think doing this video has allowed me to articulate why I love this book as much as I do, better than I have in any conversation I've had with my friends in the past. If you do end up giving this book a try, and you get sucked in like I did, know that you're not alone. Despite how unconventional his writing might be, he's still one of the most popular authors on the planet. There are some great communities online on Reddit and Facebook and Discord, all dedicated to talking Murakami. You can even play Murakami Bingo. I'll leave this discussion at that for now. I know that if even just one of you picks up Wind Up Bird and finds some joy in it, I'll have done my job right. I'll most definitely be making another Murakami video in the future, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching my video and sticking it through to the end. If you liked what you saw, please hit those like and subscribe buttons, or share the video with a friend. Have you read the Wind Up Bird Chronicle? What did you think of the book? Have you read any of Murakami's other work? Feel free to comment down below. Thanks again, and I'll see you around. Have a good one.